Good afternoon, everybody. I've got brief remarks and very happy to take a few questions. This is unscripted, but we read a report earlier that there are 3 children in the state who have been separated from their parents under this awful Trump policy, which he, at the one hand, claims to have ended, but on the other hand, there's no solution for the families that have been separated. And so we are trying to track down the details of those children. So I don't have any good answers for you because I know some of you have asked. Thanks for sticking around. I'm sorry to be late. I apologize. And I've got my American flag tie on today. The people of New Jersey elected me to end business as usual. They had enough of rosy scenarios that blew up in their faces and short-term so-called solutions that just papered over our long-term problems. Unfortunately, the legislature seems intent on keeping the legacy of Chris Christie alive and well in Trenton with a budget to match. This is not a game. These negotiations aren't about us. Who wins and loses here in Trenton is meaningless next to whether we do the right thing by the people of New Jersey. I will not put forward gimmicks and games that I know are ticking time bombs and call it a day. We did that for 8 years, and look where that got us. These practices are why we had, in the prior administration, 11 straight credit downgrades. They are why our finances are a national joke. They are why the people of New Jersey have continually seen the promises made to them in one year broken the next. We have acted with an unprecedented transparency. We have provided the Senate President and the Speaker and their teams all of the data proving the validity of our numbers and that theirs, not all, but in many cases, were not real. This is not Donald Trump's Washington. We do not work with alt facts. I don't recall anything from the Senate side that's been offered or moved on. I put forward a conceptual notion, not the first time today. I put forward a conceptual notion where I felt like there was a general framework of where we could find some common ground, where we could, on the one hand, be deemed to be responsible and willing to compromise, but not, and importantly, not compromise our principles and our core values. So I'll leave it at that and take any other questions. Michael?
It's been reported, and we've heard independently, that you offered a 2-year phase-in on restoring the sales tax and moved the threshold on the millionaire's tax from $1 million to $5 million in income. Can you confirm that?
That is not accurate. We did have some conceptual conversations about tweaking at the edges of things, whether that's time or amounts, but that is not accurate. David?
Governor, is there a meeting? Are there other meetings scheduled? Are you going to meet later on today?
I said that I was prepared to keep meeting, as I've said all week, but I just reiterated it every minute of every hour of every day. I think they're down the street voting, as if I'm not mistaken.
Governor, will you?
Michael?
So after a couple of meetings today, would you say you're more encouraged than you were or more discouraged?
I'm disappointed that the legacy of the Christie deal-making years has not been wrung from the system. So I have to tell you, we got handed we got described, rather, a week ago Monday, there was no paper associated with it, a budget that we scored it would end with a negative, somewhere between negative 30-ish and negative $130 million deficit at the end of the fiscal year 2019. So June 30th of next year. So that doesn't make you terribly encouraged. There have been moments in time, and by the way, we still have some time to go here. So we're not at 1 minute of midnight, but I'm not more encouraged. Charlie? Sorry, I missed you, Paul.
So what did they put, what transactional
Well, first of all, yes, a lot. So trying to score things. I'll give you an example, by the way. You got to be careful of the facts and the alt facts, guys and ladies. So the Supreme Court decision came down today on internet sales. We had scored in an action that we were already taking $24 million. I believe that came down at noon. There was a working group meeting at 1, and we were asked, why the heck haven't you figured out what you'd score this at? And some phantom CBO study is bandied about. And so that now it may be being reported by some of you that we rejected that. That's completely false. We said, listen, we've got 24 in it. We need to understand this more. I've got it, but there's one guy who has to certify the revenues in the budget, one person. So while this is in many respects a collaborative effort, the buck stops with me. So I'm not going to do a lot of, so that's one thing. I hope we can find more than $24 million, by the way. Count me in. I'm looking. They came in with higher estimates on a whole lot of things. The other day, I'm not sure you were here, they had audits scored at I believe, $150 million. Well, that'd be good. They had I'm putting aside the philosophical issue I've got with a 4% CBT tax for a minute, and I've got a big, particularly one that's temporary. So those got some big issues around it. But they scored it at a much higher number than we did. And I think, by the way, their proposal, and I hope the folks down the street understand this, we think it could touch as many as 90% of the businesses in the state, which I think is something around 13,000 businesses. So this is not some notion that'll just touch the big companies. And they scored it at one level, and our folks who call balls and strikes scored it at another level. So in some cases, there's stuff you literally can't score, or we wouldn't do, diverting money from the Turnpike to NJ Transit. I mean, how many times have we seen that movie before? We're just not going to do that anymore. We're trying to wring that out of our system. So I could go on, but those are some examples.
Governor, so you said that they're down there voting. If they send you,
I actually don't know. I believe they are.
They say that they plan to vote. I mean, if they vote on their budget today that you clearly disagree with, are you prepared to veto it tonight?
Yeah, my answer is on timing and what options we have before us. Everything is on the table. Paul, sorry.
When it comes to rosy scenarios, adding universal pre-K, county college, fully funding the schools, the normal pension payment hike of $750 million a year, we're talking about $4 billion more we'd be spending in a couple of years. Where could the revenue possibly come from in a non-rosy scenario for that?
May I say this, Paul? And you and I, again, I think the world of you, but we're not going to see things the same way. I just want to reiterate that, like the health warning on the side of a cigarette pack. Their budget has $450 million, I believe, more in spending than our budget had. So this is not like they came in and they cut a lot of expenses. There's $450 million more in the budget that we've seen, at least. And I have to say the budget that we've seen because you never know, than the budget we had. But I would get back to and I'm not going to comment. I think, with one topic we don't talk a whole lot about, which is part of my concern with the CBT. The last administration barely lifted a finger other than giving out big tax incentives to grow the economy. We have a lot of opportunity to grow this economy. We cannot underestimate that. I think I mentioned this.
We get $4 billion more in taxes in 3 years?
No, but I think over time, listen, one of the topics of discussion we had last week, not today, was what's next. If we take your budget this year, what's next year look like? With very reasonable growth assumptions. Next year looks pretty darn good. But again, I want to repeat, Paul, one thing, not just to you and your question, but generally, Save the Children 2 weeks ago rated New Jersey as the #1 state in the nation to raise a kid. #1 in the nation. Health, nutrition, education, safety, whatever, all the things that go into it. That doesn't come for free. So I got no problem with people here from Mississippi, and I think the world of you. We're New Jersey. You pay a premium to live here, but historically you got a rich basket of stuff back, and you're dying to raise your kids in this state. We have among the 200 to 300, if not even more, hundreds of the top school districts in America. That doesn't come for free. Can we run government more leanly? I certainly hope so. We're going to die trying. Can we break the back of property taxes? We've got a whole bunch of things we're trying to do. We're pursuing to do just that. But at the end of the day, that equation getting back into line is a big objective of ours. Please.
Are you concerned about what the citizens think of just the Democrats fighting back in the party?
I believe I'm fighting with Democrats. I think folks have to look at this and say, you know, in many respects, the Christie legacy, the deal-making, the kicking the can down the road, regardless of whether folks are Democrats or Republicans, as he is, hasn't been wrung out of the system. And that's not why we won. We telegraphed for multiple years. You all are sick of hearing this from me. We telegraphed what we were about. We laid ourselves out there. We even, whether we did it deliberately or not, we even put out exactly within $100 million the amount of taxes we're going to raise a year before the election. And we still won by 2 touchdowns. So that's a fact. Please.
What were your realistic expectations heading into this process, and how frustrating is it not to reach a compromise?
It's, first of all, it's not over yet. And I want to make sure folks who are listening, I'm not going to stop working. I'm not going to stop trying. This is more complicated than it should be. I look at the basis upon which I got elected, and by the way, the historic majorities were elected in both chambers. And it was quite clear a pro-growth progressive agenda. How many times has the millionaire's tax been voted on in both chambers? How many people complained or celebrated when the sales tax got cut, or will complain if it gets reset, just because Chris Christie did it as a gimmick to offset an increase in the gas tax? We talked about these things in the cold light of day, morning, noon, and night. So I have to say, when I sit there and I don't hear that registering with other folks, it does cause you to scratch your head. Please.
Based on your conversations,
You still going to ask me the head count question?
I'm thinking about it.
I don't have a good answer for you.
Well, based on your conversations with Republican senators, are you concerned about, the Sweeney having the numbers for a veto override?
My answer is probably similar to the one which will frustrate you from the other day. I have called folks over this entire, not just week, there's some narrative out there that I don't speak to people. Many of my team would argue that I speak to too many people. They want to have Pete wanted to borrow my cell phone a short while ago, and I said, what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to put it under the tire in my SUV and then back the SUV up over it so no one could keep calling you, or I could call them. The nature of my conversations have stayed the same. I want to make sure you folks, regardless of Democrat or Republican, you folks know exactly where I am on this, because there's all this noise of you won't meet, you won't compromise, hey, come on. This is politics, I get that. I think you could stick to your principles and still find common ground. I continue to believe that, by the way. Michael.
Governor, your discussions with the Senate President and the Assembly Speaker, what was the tone and how did it end?
No food throwing, so there's a lot of hope that, I've said this already, that these are very sort of straight up meetings. There was a disappointment, a really disappointing rejection on their part of facts, which is the reason I said what I said about alt facts, and that is discouraging. In other words, dispute about how people are scoring things. And where did it end? I said, well, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. I want to continue working.
You ended it.
No, not necessarily. It ended. They all end sort of by mutual agreement. We met a couple of times today. We met in the morning.
Discussions were professional?
Yeah, 100%. But the part that I didn't like, though, is this questioning that we've got numbers that we're deliberately cooking. We won't do that. Never have and never will. Please.
Governor, you referenced $24 million score for the impact of this Supreme Court
Yeah.
decision today, and I think what you're referring to, the report, was a government accountability office report that came out last year, 2017, and it ranked how much money could be realized in all the states, and
Yeah.
specifically that New Jersey could have somewhere between 240 and $350 million in annual revenue from this. So how could you possibly score it so low?
Well, because the scoring was the incremental amount, Ryan. That we're already scoring. We're already taking some of this revenue in. And so we're just trying to figure out the number. Again, any characterization that we rejected a larger number is false. It's absolutely false. We've not rejected anything. We literally, the Supreme Court decision came down at noon, and the meeting at the working level was at 1. The Department of Law is still trying to figure out. By the way, I'm told by our lawyer friends that this will be remanded. So it's not a clean shot in the legal sense either, and I'm not a lawyer, so that's another, in addition to the pure math, That's another wild card. I hope that by June 30th, that we can get a number that's bigger than 24 that we can certify. We never said we weren't going to try to do that. I just don't know what that number is. So I can't sit here today and quote unquote cut a deal with a number that I have no idea, that I have no confidence in. Please.
Does that mean you're not going to be considering potential revenue from the Supreme Court decision in the budget talk?
No, it doesn't mean that at all. I'm saying very clearly, we had scored at 24 million. Part of the reason is that we're already collecting some of this. This CBO report has been waved about. We just saw the Supreme Court ruling at noon. Well, our folks, both on the legal side and on the Treasury and OMB side, are trying to figure out what the impact is. I don't know. I don't know. Listen, if I had the answer, I promise you I'd tell you. At least 24.5 million.
Governor?
That's a joke, I apologize. Charlie, and then David.
Just to follow on Karen's question, though, are you concerned about the image that, and the consequences of being, here's a Democratic Party, spent years getting to this position, full control of the State House, and the first minute, for the 6 months you got it, you have dysfunction, and it's a shutdown 2 years in a row now. Isn't it concerned about the image that you're a party that can't govern?
So I'm going to repeat something I think I said the other day in response to a question, and I think all of us, all the leaders would agree, we've gotten a lot done. We got more done in the first almost 6 months than people expected us. So let's not lose sight of that. Secondly, I'm not announcing a shutdown today, right? So I'm giving you a 5,000-mile checkup report on where we are. We still have 9 days to go. By the way, this is the longest day of the year, perhaps figuratively and literally. Thirdly, regardless of what party I'm in, this notion of are you going to pay a price, it rolls off my back. I was not sent here to keep doing business as usual. That's not who I am. That's not why I got elected. I got elected to come here and crack the back of this idiocy of kicking the can, phantom numbers, Band-Aids, toothpicks. Enough. The 9 million residents in this state want adult, responsible leadership that makes a historic reinvestment in the middle class and in the dreams of those, as I was growing up, who aspire to get into the middle class. That's why I got here. I'm calling balls and strikes. David.
Last question. Governor, has your team not counted votes? Is that what you're saying, that your team has not counted votes either on this budget or potential override? You've had?
No, I'd say maybe our team has. I was talking about the specific nature of my outreach, and that is pretty comprehensive at this point, as you can imagine. Just talking to folks and making sure they know exactly where we stand. And by the way, a lot of folks want to know, they've got questions for us, and so that's been a very good back and forth. You can ask my brethren back there whether or not they're counting any noses. I appreciate it. My guess is, we have to sort of figure out where we go from here. Obviously, we got some activity down the end of the street, so stay tuned. Again, I remain an optimist, but we're not going to, on the one hand, we're willing to find common ground. You have my word, and everybody needs to know that we believe in that. But on the other hand, we're not going to sacrifice our principles, and we're not going to get sucked into business as usual. So stay tuned. I'm sorry we got started late and gave you a short notice. Take care, everybody.